And by the way, again, if you're super shy about people and you don't want your voice heard, that's cool. I can put an AI voice in, so I'll edit out. If you just hit me up in the chat, I can edit out your voice so that it'll be like you weren't even here. I can cover your name. It's all good. But I wanted to get people the opportunity to sort of see this conversation because I think it's going to be useful. So, what did we say before we went on our little field trip? We said that if we all agree, it's probably right. So we're looking at where the differences are. So when you look at my picture, like what differences did you notice that you might have questions about?
I think the biggest thing for me is the notion of not having the Scrum Master in the daily Scrum.
Yeah, you're not alone in that because people don't under. Let me ask you this: do you do daily scrums?
Yes.
Do is that what they're called?
Stand up.
Stand up. Yeah. See, this is one of my pet peeves. So I started out life in XP, right? Extreme programming. Before I transitioned to project management, and I didn't do it a lot. I wish I had because it's awesome. I've worked with plenty of XP teams, but they have something called a daily stand up where a bunch of developers back in the day when you had to be co-located to do XP, so we just huddle around one machine and talk about like what's been going on and to each other, right? It wasn't really this status reporting thing. It was more like, what am I going to do so that other people know not to step on my toes because we're all, we're doing trunk-based development, so everybody's working in the same area of the code. If you're not technical, I usually say it's like a bunch of college kids are writing a term paper, except for they only got one sheet of paper and one pen and one eraser. And so they have to first thing in the morning sort of, hey, what's been going on? What were people working on yesterday? What do we want to try to do today? Do we have any blockers? That kind of thing. And that's a perfectly useful conversation for XP developers. The Scrum has a different name. It's called the Daily Scrum. And I didn't understand this for a long time. I did this sad panda status report, and you've seen this, I'm sure. Yesterday I blah 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 blah. Today I blah 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 blah. I have no impediments, which is painful and boring. And if you ask any team I've ever talked to, ask them if they like it. They're like, nah, it's stupid. We hate doing daily stand-ups. Because why? Well, we got a sprint backlog that's a big visualization of what we're doing. We talk to each other and work to each other every day. We don't got to talk about status to each other. Not only that, unlike an XP stand-up where everybody kind of speaks the same language, on a Scrum team that's cross-functional, you got like a business analyst, you got like a front-end developer, you got all kinds of different people. They speak different languages. And so what you're likely to see is, if they're doing this sad panda status report, I call it, is, the C# front-end guy is going to say, yesterday I derived a subclass from superclass XYZ, and I wrote 2 private methods and exposed 3, and then I wrote 27 unit tests for a Mamu dog face banana patch. Meanwhile, the business analyst is sitting there going, what am I doing in this Zoom? And then if they have the guys to say, the business analyst might say something like, are you speaking English, bruh? And then the C# developer, who's probably a little bit ND like me, says, no, I'm speaking C#. Don't you speak C#? And then the business analyst is like, no, who speaks C#? Why are we even having this conversation again? They hate it. They absolutely hate it because that's not what it's for. There is one purpose and one purpose only for a Scrum, and that is for everybody to get together once a day and say, are we going to accomplish our sprint goal? And that unpacks a whole nother can of worms, which is, what's the sprint goal? Well, a sprint goal, simply stated, is build something, anything, even the wrong thing, so we get it a usable thing in front of real people, have them try it out, and tell us what they like, don't like, etc. Right? Why are we doing Scrum in the first place? Because we know we're going to make the wrong thing, so we're going to make the wrong thing a couple weeks at a time, and then we're going to work with the people that we're making it for. Well, you want to change anything about it? So this daily stand-up anti-pattern is everywhere, and I rant about it and rave about it. It's part of why I'm going to stream this conversation, because I'm tired of having it. A daily Scrum is much simpler than status. We don't need to report status to each other. Even worse is sometimes people don't understand the SM role, Scrum Master, because it's got a dumb name. So they try to map it to something else. They're like, that's basically an agile project manager, isn't it? No. Project managers manage projects. They manage the work. Scrum Masters don't manage nothing. They are an evangelist for Scrum. They explain Scrum to people. They facilitate events as needed. As needed. Now, if I'm a Scrum Master and I'm with a new team, I'm going to go into their, especially if they're calling it a stand-up, and if I see that Sad Panda status report, I'm going to be like, um, and a good facilitator asks questions. They do not make many declarative statements. So I'm going to say, are y'all getting value out of this conversation? I mean, you have this conversation every day. It's a little spendy. You got everybody on the team. Are you getting value out of it? And they're gonna. I promise you, they're gonna say, nah, it's dumb. And I'm gonna say, well, then why are you doing it? Well, because it's a Scrum thing. Is it? Where did we get that information? Did we get it from the Scrum Guide? Because the Scrum, finally in 2020, the Scrum Guide, there a lot of great things happened because we were all, global shutdown and we had lots of spare time, right? I used to spend 80% of my time out of the house, and most of that was traveling. I'd work like 2 days a week. Oh, those were beautiful days. Thanks, Rona. But I'll watch it and be like, "Are you sure?" And then we can start to figure out like where they get their information from. 9 times out of 10, it's probably Jira or some Agile who hasn't done Scrum in 20 years. And I hate to tear down my own people, but I'm going to call people out and say, if you're still using PowerPoint slides, if you're still using the same slides you were using 10 years ago, if you're still teaching the same ideas from the late 90s, early 2000s, you are an Agile. And I feel bad for you because you probably don't even know. So finally, the 2020 version of the guide, it explains this daily Scrum is for inspecting progress towards the sprint goal and adapting it, the sprint backlog, if needed. So most times that's going to be a pretty short conversation. Not everybody has the same thing. It's not a status report. It used to feel an awful lot like we're trying to prove that we're doing work. Yes, we're definitely doing work. Look at the work we're doing. We're doing work. I don't care. I don't care if my Scrum team's doing any work. If they deliver value by sprint review, I don't care how it happened, right? We got to move away from this output-focused approach. Like, if we did all the work, then we're good. No. So, and then the 2020 version of the guide explains that. And it also says the product owner and the Scrum Master are optional. Scrum Master is optional at all events. If they can manage that event by themselves, the Scrum Master doesn't need to be there. And in fact, I tell new Scrum Masters, look, you're going to need to spend every precious moment you have. People can understand this, right? It's not rocket surgery. I got my 10-year-old daughter to pass the first version of this test using only Google, right? So this is not a heavy mental lift. It's unpacking what it really means, right? So they're doing it that way, and they don't want to do it that way. And I'll be like, well, this is what it really is. And finally, we have some backup because we can go, there's the Scrum Guide. We can agree to disagree on that, but don't say you're playing this game if you're not playing by this game's rules, in my opinion, right? Like you don't get to, and this is sort of a cultural phenomenon right now. You don't get to start a game of kickball and then have a bunch of big bully kids come and say, you know what, we're gonna play kickball, and then they start playing dodgeball, which is a horrific game that was invented by some sadist. So the Scrum Master, I don't gotta be there unless they don't know how to do it. And if they don't know how to do it, then I'm doing my job. I ask them questions. Why are you doing that? Let's go look at the rules that we're all going to agree to. Do we all agree to these rules? And if we don't, okay. I mean, there's only a handful of real hard rules in the Scrum framework. Most of it's guidelines. That's why it's called a Scrum Guide. So I'm like, yeah, don't do the Sad Panda status report. And you'll be a hero. Like, you can walk in tomorrow and be a hero if you just do this riff. And if you need backup because people don't believe you, see if you can get some spend to get me to come in. I'm happy to holler at people about Scrum. I know other people that'd be happy to do it too, so I don't want to be there. It's not useful or interesting for me. The other thing is if my team thinks I'm some kind of manager, and I've literally heard organizations rename Scrum Master to Scrum Manager, and I'm like, okay, I'm changing my title from Scrum Trainer to King of England. I don't think that's how that works, but manifest. So I'm glad you brought that up because this is a very simple thing we can change. Very simple thing that we can change right away and start to build credibility for ourselves, start to build trust and respect, and dare I say it, love. I mean, if your team doesn't love you, you're doing something wrong. not wrong, but you're not being terribly useful. So that's what I would have to say about the scrum. Not only team members need to be there, and I definitely, and we used to back in the day, we're like, oh, we want maximum transparency, so let's invite all of our stakeholders and end users and president of the company. That is a terrible idea. Do you think people are going to really openly and honestly talk about what's going wrong or right with what they're doing or what they got to change if their boss is watching? No. And I have concrete evidence of this because I was doing a daily scrum with a team that I had been working with for, I don't know, 10, 12 months. And they were starting to really click, and they were using XP because I brought an XP coach, and they're doing their scrum, and they're talking about, hey, okay, so here's our sprint goal, which is on your sprint backlog, and it's something broad. It's not tied to specific backlog items, and they're like, how's it going? And they're just start talking back and forth, informal conversation. That's the other thing in the 2020 version of the guide. It does not mention the 3-question format, really. It says the team should decide how to do it. Agree. So I'm doing this, and I used to would, just to make a point of it, I would just do a Rubik's Cube. When I'm scrum mastering, I would just do a Rubik's Cube if they weren't supposed to be talking to me, because initially they think I'm in charge of something, and so they'll look right at me. And it annoyed them at first, except for I'm not great with eye contact anyway, so they were kind of used to that. Just because an ND person is not making eye contact does not mean that they're not paying attention or interested, just so you know. So I'm just sitting there doing a Rubik's Cube, and all of a sudden the temperature of the room drops like 10 degrees, and they all about face towards me, and it's like they're in the military at parade rest. And I'm like, what's going on? Did I do something funny? Is there something on my face? And I look, their eyes are looking over my shoulder, and I turn around, and I'm like, oh, hey, who are you? And this guy in a suit says, I'm Ed, and I'm the president of the division. And I said, oh, okay. He didn't actually tell me he was president of the division. He just said, I'm Ed. I'm like, oh, okay. And then he starts talking. I'm like, hold on, Ed. And now here's the thing. He didn't tell me what his title was, but I did know if you're in in an IT department or a software group or something like that, and somebody shows up in a suit, it means one of three things. They just came from court, or they're looking for a new job, or there's some kind of executive and you could get in trouble. But I'm not smart enough to know to not get in trouble, and I kind of just say what's on my mind. So Ed said, hey, Ed, like, I'm sure we would love to talk to you. We're doing a scrum right now. They're going to spend another, I think we got about 5 minutes left. And then if you want to say something, you go right ahead. And I turn back around, and they're all staring at me like I have a second head. And I didn't, but they were staring at me like I was nuts. And I'm like, okay, proceed. Go ahead, finish your scrum, and then we'll talk to Ed. And Ed very, very kindly just sort of stepped back out into the hallway and was kind of just peeking. And they're still like looking like, are you sure? And then they finished it. And then Ed comes in, and not his real name. And Ed says, hey, yeah, guys, I didn't want to interrupt this. I just, you all have been doing a great job. I wanted to see what was going on. I want to see if we can scale this. Sorry, I have traumatic stress over scaling. But I did not mean to interfere. And so thank you very much. And we all left and everything like that. And I go out in the hallway to talk to Ed, and Ed says, "Thank you so much." And this is often true. I've worked with lots of C-levels and lots of executives, and very many of them, the good ones anyway. They want people to be open and honest with them, and they want people to tell them when they're wrong. Not some of them don't, but a lot of them do. But nobody does because they got a title, right? And Ed says to me, "Thank you so much. That was very courageous of you to just tell me what I was doing wrong, because nobody tells me that because I'm the president." I'm like, "Well, sir, I'm a Scrum Master, and it's definitely one of my main jobs, and one of the main values in Scrum is courage. And as a Scrum Master, I must be relentlessly courageous in the protection of my team. Also, I did not know who you were. Please don't cancel my contract." And he's like, no, it's all good. We're good. So this is a very simple thing we can change. And then there's a big argument. Well, we're supposed to be transparent. Yeah, transparency isn't about people standing in front of somebody else telling them something. The only transparency in Scrum is the artifacts. Go ahead. I see a hand up. What you got? Hit me.
Yeah, that's me. So, Jimmy, as far as Scrum Masters not attending daily Scrum,
Yeah.
what about impediments that the team is affected by and they're originating from outside of the lane? Isn't that something you'd expect the Scrum Master to perhaps reach out to the Scrum Master or the other team that's kind of causing it to resolve that?
Yeah, but I don't want to have that conversation in the scrum. If so, the team has this conversation, and they might talk about blockers. Sure. If the main thing is they should definitely talk about, is our sprint goal in jeopardy? If their sprint goal's in jeopardy, then one of them or several of them got to come out, find me. We'll go find a product owner. We'll talk it out. We'll figure out what's blocking it. When you do the three question format thing, the reason people stopped doing it, who knew better because they suffered so much, is because most of the blockers and impediments that don't get surfaced in the daily scrum. They get surfaced when they happen, right? Like I got a developer who can't get access to their source code repository. Now I know how to say those words, but I don't know what they mean in that order, in that sentence. And that's going to happen while they're working. They're not going to wait, I hope, until the next 15-minute conversation, which is always longer than 15 minutes. It should be a lot less, actually. And then I want them to come to me and say, hey, we got this problem, and we'll go talk to them. What I don't want to do is waste everyone's time reporting status and talking about how to solve these whatever problems we have determined exist. And not the other thing, pro tip, most Scrum Masters don't have the authority to fix anything. All we can do is take the people that got a problem, find the people that can solve the problem, put them together, and have them talk to each other. So, this is a very lightweight framework. What we want, because almost all humans are somewhat left brain poison, what we want is clear steps. This is exactly what we should do. Reality don't work that way. Does that make sense? Did I answer your question?
Yeah, you did. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. Anything else you noticed about my picture that could be different from what you drew, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
What about the top left corner with your little text box and the
Oh,
product
yeah. So I've been
name?
a product owner a bunch of times. And here's another thing that's like, everybody seems to agree with this, but they don't actually practice it. Scrum separates what from how. It's an empirical process. We spend very little time up front thinking about things, because no matter how long you think about it, no matter how much you write down, no matter what pretty pictures you pick, none of that is the real thing. The only thing that gives us, if we're empiricists, which we should be if we're doing Scrum, the only thing that gives us any real information is direct experience between the end user and whatever it is we're making. So we separate what from how. Product owner is responsible for the what, right? And we're going to go through this later tomorrow, because we're going to do a real Scrum project. So they're supposed to be responsible for the what. They create a list. They put that list, post it publicly and visibly somewhere where everybody can see it. So, and all that list really shows is sort of like placeholders, like pins and ideas. Here's something that somebody says they need or probably need solved. We're not going to talk about it. We're not going to think about it right now. All the PBI is going to do is be on that list and show my product owner's current and near future priorities, because their primary job to maximize the value of the team is to make sure the right conversations happen in the right order. That's what a product backlog is for. Right? So that's why it's called a list, because it's literally a list. So if the product owner is doing that job, and the Scrum Master is responsible for the Scrum stuff, and the team members are the only ones that are responsible for the how, right? Like we're gonna use React Native, we're gonna use Flutter, we're gonna use Swift UI, we're gonna do all that stuff. My product owner shouldn't know nothing about that. I shouldn't really either as a Scrum Master. I should know enough to know what they're saying so I can tell whether they're BSing me or not. But the product owner should have no contribution to that conversation. And the retrospective is supposed to be about improvement, continuous improvement of our development practice. Like, because Scrum is training wheels for agility. I stole that from a friend of mine named Dr. Dan Rosthorn, who's also CST. And that's the greatest way I can think of to describe it, training wheels for agility. There's a handful of rules. You try to follow those rules, and the wheels fall off. And the retrospective is the opportunity to say, how could we suck less? It sounds negative, but that's just honest, right? Like, this is about getting better at what we're doing. So when you first start really doing this and trying to be agile, you can't do agile. Just say it out loud. It doesn't make any sense. So if you're trying to be agile, this is the opportunity, just like the game that we played, that ballpoints game that we played this morning, where you're throwing the little balls around and deciding round by round what to change about your process. That's what this is for. And my product owner should have no input. The only time I want my product owner there is if we want to holler at him. I will have scrum teams do every third or fourth retrospective. I'll say, we're going to do a hot seat retrospective. We started doing this with the team I was working at Microsoft. And the hot seat retrospective was I would do whatever I could as Scrum Master to get somebody who can solve problems, a senior leader, into the retro to literally sit in a chair and listen while the developers tell them what's wrong with the organization. And it's tough to get people to talk, so you need some facilitation tricks for this. And sometimes nobody'd show up. Like we invited Bill a bunch of times, never came, but he's a busy guy. But we did get a couple of his direct reports over a period of about a couple years, and some of them were very. But a few of them, the good ones, the good leaders, will sit there and listen, and then my team can say, look, this is interfering with our ability to do this. This is interfering with our ability to do this. Can you please do something about it? So that's the only time I would expect somebody besides Scrum Master and team members to be there. Right? And if I'm a Scrum Master, I better get good at this. I need to learn about facilitation. That's why I offer the only other non-entry-level certification I offer is the CAF. We can talk about that later. I don't want to be a sales pitch. So product owner doesn't have anything useful or interesting to say. They're going to be bored out of their mind because they're going to listen to a bunch of nerds talking about nerd things. And I say nerd with great respect because I am one. There's no reason for him to be there. Now, what does the framework say? Who goes to the sprint retrospective? Scrum team. It's a little bit cryptic, and that's because there's been a nearly religious argument for decades. Is the product owner on the team? Is the product owner not on the team? I would say, yes, the product owner is an individual contributor with no special authority other than ordering this list, that's precious little. But they're going to be perceived, because of the name, product owner, they're going to be perceived as a boss of some kind. And if they're in the room, not only are they going to be bored and not know what anybody's talking about, they're going to interfere because everybody else is going to see that, oh, boss man's in the room, boss lady's in the room. We better not talk about anything we did wrong, which is the whole point of this conversation, right? We struggled with this. This didn't work. This didn't work. Here's what we should change. We should do pair programming. We should do test-driven design and development. We should do, I'm going to not list all of the 12 practices of XP, but if your team's not doing extreme programming or Crystal or feature-driven development or behavior, some kind of agile engineering framework, if you're doing software, they're going to have a bad time. And I don't want it made worse by having some perceived authority in the room where they got to pretend, like when Ed showed up and I told Ed to get out. I have, because I'm too dumb to know better, I have had an executive vice president come into a team scrum who I knew exactly who they were, and I'm like, what are you doing here? I'm like, oh, I just wanted to sit in. No, get out. Like I have resting dick voice. I can't help it. It's just because that's not going to be useful. I don't care so much. I should care more about people's feelings, but it's also a little bit of a superpower because I don't worry that much if somebody's going to get upset if I'm saying the right thing, doing the right thing, and protecting my team. If I ever get fired for telling an executive don't participate in the retrospective because it will undermine its purpose, and I get fired or chastised for that, I'll be like, all right, catch you later. I'm going to shine this on. I'm out. Peace. Have a good time doing your scrummishness. So that's sort of my view on it. Not only that, so the product owner is not going to have much useful to contribute. They're going to be a perceived authority that interferes with the whole purpose of that event. And let's think about this. We start every sprint with almost no information about what we're going to make. We have these very, terse, I use one word up to maybe a phrase worth of information because it's a list. You don't put paragraphs of information on a list. A list of paragraphs has a different name, right? It's called a book. If we could do that, if we could create a big, long requirements document and hand it to developers and they'd make the right thing, we wouldn't do Scrum. Hell no. We would do the waterfall. Waterfall works great for lots of stuff. But where it doesn't work, this is what the approach we're going to try to take. And so what's going to happen? Well, we're going to have almost nothing, and we're going to spend 2 weeks trying to make something, anything, even the wrong thing that's actually usable that we can get in front of real people to try out, because it's the only way we're going to get the information that we need. So what's going to happen to this poor product owner? Well, there's going to be some new value delivered at sprint review, and it's going to be stuff that people who want or benefit from it are going to try it out, and they're going to give lots of feedback if we're doing it right. If you're doing like a dog and pony show demo, I'll tell you later why that's utterly pointless. But if they're really trying out and we're having just an informal conversation of, you like what we did? What do we need to change about it? And we're finding our way to the delivery of value. The product owner is going to have a lot to do, and they're only going to have about 2 hours to do it, right? Because on a 2-week sprint, the review's 2 hours, the retro's 2 hours probably. And so that's why I have those little purple lines there, because they've got precious little time to get their backlog back in shape based on the feedback that comes in. Right? And sometimes what's going to happen? Well, no, that's great. Everything's great. Okay, so there's not much work there. Sometimes, though, it's going to be, oh my gosh, this is completely wrong. We said we wanted this, but when we actually try the real thing, we don't like it. That happens a lot. Sometimes it's going to be, though, hey, we didn't even think of this. We need to be able to do whatever it is they need to be able to do. It's not in the increment, and it's not on the list. We need to add that. Well, all that conversation has to happen between sprint review and sprint planning, which is 2 hours. So I tell my product owners, don't go to the retro unless the team wants to holler at you about the way you're doing your job, in which case, by all means, if they're struggling with the way I capture and disseminate my backlog, fine. But that's just a lot of this is sort of just guidelines, and it's just a lot of it is sort of subjective opinion. There's not a lot of rules. It's 11 pages. It's not rocket surgery. But because it's so contrary to what we're used to, we're like, oh, no, that's not going to work. We can't do that. And then, manager types will get in the way, right? I mean, like there was this guy I told you about earlier named PMO Jimmy, and PMO Jimmy wanted to fire Dave. For those of you who are watching, if you don't know what I'm talking about, you should take my workshop. Anyway, any other questions about any of this? I mean, you're drinking from a fire hose right now, so... right now, today, all we're trying to do is hack your brain. I've spent, I don't know, 20 years in product development. An awful lot of that was educational testing, probably 25% educational testing and for-profit universities and stuff like that, because I come from a family of educators and communicators. So those are what I naturally gravitated towards. So this is going to be mind-wobbling. Sorry, mind-boggling. No, I hate boggle. I already explained that. And anybody who's watching, do not make your 8-year-old kid play boggle or Scrabble. My grandmother's like, I can't even, I'm 6 years old. I can't even spell. Go look it up then. Okay, if I can't spell, I don't know how to look it up in a dictionary. Now I got chats. I'll just ask them. What does this mean? Any other questions before we, blaze through the entire framework in about an hour so that you pass the test? I have a 100% pass rate. I know it's a weird flex, but it's not because I'm a super genius. I mean, I am a super genius, but it's not because of that. It's because it's not a terribly difficult test, and I also understand how human brains work and take tests. So, speaking of which, we're going to launch. I've spent the last, I don't know, year plus developing 1,000 statistically valid Scrum questions that correspond to the ones on the Scrum Alliance test, about 60% of the PSM, about 60% of the ACP, and we're gonna launch that at a reasonable fee, but using the NCME and a bunch of other stuff. Anyway, enough about that. Any other questions before we move on?